now we're going to do section 3, the war divides America, talking about the Vietnam War. Okay, so first of all, what we need to talk about, draftees. A draftee is somebody who was drafted into the military. They didn't voluntarily sign up. They were, told, hey, you need to come and fight. And if you guys probably know, all men, when they turn 18, they're supposed to register for the draft. Okay, but by 1965, most of the soldiers who were serving in Vietnam, they were being drafted. And as I told you guys yesterday, that's going to kind of have an effect on their morale. And the problem was most of the draftees were poor and they were black. Because when the draft first started, they had a draft board that kind of chose people, and they tried to, if you had a certain occupation or you went to college, they would give you a deferment so you didn't get drafted. But the problem with that was, not everybody can afford to go to college. So the people who got drafted were poor, and a lot of poor people were also black at the time. And so there were problems with that. A deferment, like I said, it just means that you don't have to go. But eventually they changed to a lottery system where people were drawn at random because it was a more fair way of doing it, but also it provided a more diverse population who was going to serve, because we had a very disproportionate number of African Americans who were fighting and dying in this war. And it was because of how they were being drafted. Okay, so now let's talk about the activism on college campuses. You guys probably know that Vietnam completely divided America. There was a very anti-war sentiment amongst a lot of Americans. But when the war first started, the majority of Americans were on board with it. But as it drug on, we're going to start to see people opposing it. And most of this activism is going to take place on college campuses. And you'll find that today, that college campuses are some of the most liberal and radical places in the United States. They just are. So one organization, and this will be on your worksheet today, the Students for a Democratic Society, SDS. It was an organization that was created for the sole purpose of protesting the war. Okay? Now, probably two of the most active college campuses in the country were the University of Michigan and the University of California at Berkeley, more commonly just called Berkeley. But anyhow, they started this free speech movement at these two campuses, and this was all part of the SDS, where they would, use the college campus to host events where they protested the war. And the college campuses, at first, they're kind of like, I'm not so sure about this. This is kind of radical. Like, we don't need all your brouhaha going on here on the campus, okay? And so there's going to be some issues with that. Eventually, they let these students protest the war on campus just because, there was violence if they didn't, and it kind of looked bad for everybody. So they just let them have their free speech movement, okay? Now, another thing that's going on in the 1960s, and this is something that still exists today, it's the credibility gap. This is the growing distrust of statements made by the government. And basically, it's the difference between what the administration says is going on and then what journalists report. Because everybody didn't trust the government at this time, because they kept saying, hey, the war's almost over, we're about to win, we're about to win. Well, newsflash, we weren't about to win, and it wasn't almost over. So we're going to see this credibility gap start to become more prominent, and it kind of evolved in the 1960s. Okay, so now let's talk about the Tet Offensive, okay? Actually, the United States, Lyndon Johnson, he had General Westmoreland in November 1967. He said, hey, I want you to come home. I want you to talk to the American people. I want you to tell them that we're on the verge of winning. Okay, and so William Westmoreland came home and he said, hey guys, America's about to win the war. We got this. The Viet Cong, the North Vietnamese, they're going down. Okay, well, here's the deal. They weren't. Okay, it wasn't going well. And so as these claims were being made, the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong were planning what we call today the Tet Offensive. Okay, the Tet Offensive is a coordinated assault on 36 different provincial capitals. A provincial capital is like a state capital here in the U.S. and 5 major cities and the United States Embassy in South Vietnam. And as you can see in this map, all of these red dots are places where these attacks happened. And they all happened at just about the same time. And this fighting lasted, I believe, for about 22 to 26 days, I believe, where the United States and the South Vietnamese were going door to door, house to house, fighting the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese because they started attacking. And the reason we call this the Tet Offensive, it happened during the Tet holiday. It's a lunar New Year in Vietnamese culture, and so nobody was expecting it to happen because, you know, everybody's celebrating the New Year, having a good time, and then all of a sudden, boom! We've got ourselves an offensive here. Okay? Now, the United States and the South Vietnamese, you know, they are going to be able to handle what the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong throw at them, but it came at great cost. There were lots of casualties. But the United States, eventually, we stopped the North Vietnamese from achieving their goal, which was to take over all of the major cities. If they had taken all of the major cities, victory would have been a sure thing for them. But we stopped them from doing that. But the thing was, even though technically it was an American victory, it was a strategic blow to us. Because here we are saying, hey, we're winning, you know? We're not winning. Okay, so like I said, it was technically or tactically a victory for the U.S., but strategically, not so much. And now we have a new Secretary of Defense. His name is Clark Clifford. And, you know, Lyndon Johnson asked him, hey, should we send more troops? What do you think? What should we do? And Clark Clifford basically said no, because we're going to have more people die. It's going to create more problems here at home. He said we need to shift our strategy in Vietnam. The original strategy was to pursue victory, you know, get rid of communism. But now we're going to have to start trying to negotiate a peace. That's eventually going to become the official position of the U.S. government, is negotiate a peace to end this war in Vietnam. Okay? And in 1968, we didn't just have the Tet Offensive, we have a presidential election. Things don't just stop because these things are happening. We still have business as usual in the United States. Now, the president at the time, Lyndon Johnson, he is a Democrat, but there's going to be people who challenge him for presidential re-election. And one of these guys, he'll be on your worksheet today, is Eugene McCarthy. He was an anti-war senator from Minnesota, and he was running for president. Okay? Here we go, Gene McCarthy for president. But he said that the war in Vietnam took away from domestic issues, which it did. We were so focused on Vietnam that we couldn't take care of business at home. Then we have New York Senator Robert Kennedy, who is the little brother of JFK, who you guys know was smoking hot. His little brother was pretty good looking too. Okay, there's a picture of him. He's pretty gorgeous. But he pretty much took the same stance. War takes away from focusing on poverty and discrimination here in the United States, so we need to negotiate a peace. We need to get out. And in March 1968, Lyndon Johnson, he had an address to the nation, and he shocked, this will be on your worksheet, he shocked the American people because he got on there and he announced, you know what, I'm not going to seek re-election. And America was like, say what? But he wasn't. He realized that the Vietnam War had undermined his presidency and he didn't know if he could win. So he said, I'm not going to run. And this just made it crazy. And everybody was like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And Robert Kennedy probably would have won, but we'll get to why he didn't later. Okay? And at this point in this address, LBJ also says that seeking peace is now the official position of the United States government. Okay, so some of the things that happened in 1968, it was a year of violence, to be honest with you. Martin Luther King Jr., who was one of the most outspoken advocates against Vietnam because of, how many African Americans were fighting and dying because of the discriminatory policies. He was outspoken against it, and he was assassinated. We already talked about that. He was in Memphis, Tennessee, and he was assassinated in 1968. Then in June 5th, on June 5th, 1968, Robert Kennedy was speaking at a hotel in California, talking about, he was celebrating winning the California primary, and he was assassinated too. He was shot down. And the guy who killed him was a Palestinian named Sharon Sharon. I guess they thought his name was so good they gave it to him twice. But some people think that maybe he wanted revenge for America supporting Israel in this conflict that they had with Egypt. And why killing Robert Kennedy was going to get that revenge and make him feel better, I honestly don't know. But that's what happened. And so at that point, it kind of, the Democratic National Convention is right around the corner, and it's like, okay, LBJ is not running. Robert Kennedy, who probably would have been the candidate, he got shot. So are we going to have Eugene McCarthy? Is he going to be the guy? Okay. But it actually turned out that Hubert Humphrey, who was LBJ's vice president, got chosen as the Democratic nominee. But there was a lot of anger that was expressed during the Democratic National Convention, not just inside the convention, but outside as well. There's going to be anti-war protesters who are there because, the Democratic presidents, they were the ones who sent troops to Vietnam. So the anti-war protesters are there, because of that reason. Okay, but violence broke out. The police had to get involved. It was really ugly. And while this is going on, the Republicans are also choosing who they're going to have run for president. And they're like, listen, all this craziness is going on with the Democrats. We're going to pick a dude, Richard Nixon, vote for him. And the reason that Richard Nixon became so popular, he was like, hey guys, let's have peace with honor. Like, I'm going to negotiate a peace, but I'm going to make sure that they're, good peace terms, honorable peace terms for us. And he courted Southern conservatives. Okay, he tried to get the people to vote for him, who had traditionally supported the Democratic Party, but, he appealed to them because a lot of people say Nixon represented the silent majority, the non-shouters, the non-protesters, the majority of Americans who, don't go and create chaos. They just stay home, they mind their own business, they go vote, all that kind of stuff. And those people, they identified with Richard Nixon and what he was selling. And so, he's going to win the election eventually. He defeats Hubert Humphrey. He wins all of the states in red. And then, of course, we've got these states in orange. That's going to go to Alabama Governor George Wallace. He basically ran as an independent. He represented the white backlash against the civil rights movement. And only the states in the Deep South voted for him, and basically because he was kind of a racist butthole. All right.